A humble young woman accepts a dating contract with a billionaire, but she never imagined what would happen to her in the end. Hillary was always a pure-hearted young woman, living a simple life far from the excesses many her age desired. Raised in a modest neighborhood, her priorities were helping her family and keeping a job that, though humble, provided the necessary support for everyone. She never dreamed of riches or glamour, which made her special, someone genuine amidst the superficiality of modern society. Despite the difficulties, Hillary's life was full of love and humility, values she cherished above all else. However, fate had other plans. One day, while working as a waitress at a luxury event, she was approached by a man with a cold and distant demeanor. Christopher Evans, a billionaire known for both his business success and emotional coldness, was among the guests. He wasn't just a man with a colossal fortune, but also someone carrying deep wounds from a dark past marked by betrayals and disappointments. Christopher had everything money could buy, yet his soul was empty. The proposal came as a shock to Hillary. Christopher, without preamble, offered her a dating contract. At first, it seemed surreal and unthinkable to her. Who in their right mind would accept such an arrangement? However, there was something behind the proposal that made her hesitate. Hillary's family was going through severe financial difficulties, and this offer could change everything. The contract offered a substantial amount of money, enough to ensure her mother received the much-needed medical treatment and to pay off their debts. Even with the promise of solving all her problems, Hillary struggled internally. She wasn't the type to sell herself for money. Her integrity and values were unshakable. However, her mother's health and her family's safety were at stake, and this decision wasn't just about her. Hillary found herself torn between her principles and the well-being of those she loved. This duality gnawed at her, and what seemed like an easy solution quickly became the most complicated dilemma of her life. On the other hand, Christopher saw the contract as an opportunity for revenge. He had been deeply hurt in the past by his ex-girlfriend, Sarah, a woman who left him in pursuit of status and power. Now he wanted to prove he could control the circumstances around him, even love. For him, everything was about power. He saw Hillary as a pawn in his game of revenge, a way to show he could manipulate destiny. The billionaire believed that, like Sarah, every woman had a price. He just needed to find Hillary's. Despite Christopher's cold and calculated intentions, there was something in Hillary he didn't expect. Her authenticity. She wasn't interested in luxury or his fortune. When she hesitated at his proposal, he was intrigued. Hillary didn't react like the other women he had known. There was a purity in her eyes, a silent strength that disarmed him in ways he couldn't fully understand. Hillary, on the other hand, was grappling with what seemed to be the toughest decision of her life. Accepting the contract meant giving up part of her freedom and dignity in exchange for something she never wanted. However, the sight of her sick mother and the bills piling up in the living room haunted her. The weight of the responsibility on her shoulders was suffocating, and she knew a choice had to be made. After many sleepless nights reflecting on her life and priorities, Hillary made a decision that would change the course of her story. She would accept the contract, not for herself, but for her family. She put her values to the test, believing that in the end, her soul would remain intact. Hillary knew she was stepping into an unknown world, full of challenges and traps, but she had faith her essence would stay unshaken. For her, this agreement was temporary, a bridge to ensure her family's safety. With the contract in hand, Hillary felt the weight of her choice. Christopher, on the other hand, believed he had won once again, that he controlled another life. But what he didn't know was that this humble young woman, with her values and inner strength, would end up changing his life in ways he never imagined. As soon as the contract was signed, Hillary's life began to change rapidly and frighteningly. In an instant, she was pulled from her simple routine and thrown into a world she never imagined. From being a waitress at luxury events, she was now beside one of the most powerful and influential men in the country. The glamour and opulence around her were intoxicating, but Hillary never let herself be deluded. Despite the luxury cars, lavish mansions, and trips to places she never dreamed of visiting, her mind was always focused on her goal, helping her family. Christopher, on the other hand, maintained a cold and distant posture. To him, Hillary was just a part of his plan. He saw her as a tool to achieve what he desired most: revenge against Sarah and the feeling of absolute control over his own life. He had never been a man who allowed emotions to dominate him. All his life, he believed everything could be solved with a transaction: money, power, control. That's how he had reached the top, and he saw no reason to believe this time would be different. In the first few days, the relationship between the two was purely professional. Christopher set the rules, and Hillary followed. She accompanied him to gala events, business dinners, and work trips. The contract required her to act as his girlfriend in public, a role she played with surprising skill, even without any prior experience in this world of luxuries and falsities. Hillary knew her role was to keep up appearances, but always remembered her own roots, keeping her essence intact. While the public saw a glamorous and perfect couple, behind closed doors, the reality was quite different. Christopher barely spoke to Hillary outside of events. He treated her with indifference, almost as if she were an extension of his business, something to display and impress his colleagues, but with no emotional connection. Hillary noticed this, but wasn't discouraged. She understood that to Christopher, it was all a transaction, and as painful as it was, she also had her reasons for being there. However, as time passed, something unexpected began to happen. Amidst formal dinners and events filled with superficiality, Hillary stayed true to who she really was: a humble young woman who spoke sincerely and treated everyone with respect. This made her stand out, especially in the circle of people Christopher associated with, where falseness and ambition were the driving forces. The small interactions between Hillary and Christopher began to change. He, who always maintained a mask of coldness and control, found himself intrigued by the way Hillary navigated that world without losing herself. She wasn't impressed by luxury cars or shiny jewelry. What drove her was something deeper, something he, with all his wealth, couldn't buy: the simplicity and purity of a life lived with purpose. One night, after a long gala event where Christopher once again displayed his cold facade, they returned to the mansion in silence. As Christopher removed his expensive suit and prepared for another lonely night in his luxurious office, Hillary surprised him with a sincere question: "Why do you need revenge?" Christopher, caught off guard, hesitated for a moment. He was used to controlling every conversation and never allowing anyone to get close to his feelings. However, there was something in Hillary's question that made him pause. For the first time, someone looked beyond his mask of power and saw the wounded man behind it. "You wouldn't understand," he replied, his voice firm, but with a slight vulnerability that Hillary couldn't help but notice. "Maybe I don't understand everything, but I can see that, despite all you have, there's still something missing," Hillary said with a serenity that unsettled Christopher. "Money doesn't heal the wounds you carry." Those words echoed in Christopher's mind as he ascended to his office. For the first time in years, he began to question what was truly driving him. He remembered Sarah and how she left him for a man with more status, more power. That betrayal had destroyed him inside, and since then, he had dedicated himself to building a fortress around him, not just of wealth, but of absolute control over his emotions. But Hillary was challenging that without even realizing it. She wasn't trying to change Christopher, but her words, so simple and direct, began to penetrate the armor he had built over the years. Christopher always believed that love was a weakness, something that could be bought or manipulated. However, with Hillary, he started to see that maybe there was something more, something he had lost sight of long ago. In the following days, the tension between the two began to shift. Although there was still an emotional barrier between them, Christopher started to observe Hillary more closely. He noticed how she treated the employees with kindness, always genuinely smiling at everyone, making no distinction between the billionaire magnate or the driver who took them to events. There was a light in her that he couldn't ignore. And it was at that moment that Christopher realized that perhaps the contract he had established was not as simple as he imagined. Hillary was not just a tool in his game of revenge. She was something much more powerful, a living reminder of everything he had lost by closing himself off from the world. As the months passed, Hillary and Christopher began to get used to each other's presence. The contract was still in effect, but something unexpected had begun to blossom, an invisible bond, a connection that neither of them could ignore. However, the conflicting emotions between the couple created an environment of growing tension, and the barriers Christopher maintained around himself began to crumble. Hillary, despite trying to stay focused on her initial purpose, helping her family and fulfilling the contract, could not deny that something was changing. She had never fallen in love before, and the idea of developing feelings for someone so different from her, someone with a life so far from her reality, seemed absurd at first. However, it was inevitable that, living with Christopher, she began to see beyond the cold and impenetrable facade he always displayed. In moments of silence, Hillary saw the pain in Christopher's eyes, something he tried at all costs to hide. He was a man marked by deep wounds, who had built his fortune and power as a way to protect himself from the world. However, Hillary also knew that behind his wealth there was a lonely man, someone who had suffered as much as she had. This discovery touched her, and although she knew the contract limited any real involvement, Hillary could not avoid feeling compassion for him. Christopher, on the other hand, struggled with his own emotions. Hillary was different from anyone he had ever met. He had initially chosen her believing she would be easy to manipulate, but soon realized she would not bend to his will as others around him did. Hillary's silent strength challenged him. She wasn't interested in his fortune or the status he represented, and that deeply unsettled him. Instead of feeling control over the situation as he had planned, Christopher began to feel vulnerable. The conversations he and Hillary had were more meaningful than he was prepared to handle. Hillary didn't see him as an untouchable billionaire, but as a man with flaws and pain. For Christopher, this was frightening, as he had spent his entire life protecting himself from the judgment and expectations of others. Now facing Hillary, he was confronted with something he couldn't control: his own emotions. However, the presence of Sarah, his ex-girlfriend, continued to cast a shadow over their relationship. Sarah, noticing that Christopher had changed his attitude and was now closer to Hillary, reappeared in his life with a new proposal. She wanted to win Christopher back, and for that, she was willing to use every weapon she had, including the past they shared. Sarah's arrival deeply shook Hillary. She knew that Sarah had been the great love of Christopher's life, and that the betrayal he had suffered was still fresh in his memory. As much as Hillary had begun to develop feelings for Christopher, she couldn't ignore the fact that he still had unfinished business with Sarah. Moreover, Hillary felt she couldn't compete with the type of woman Sarah represented: sophisticated, confident, and above all, familiar to Christopher. Insecurity began to grow within her. Christopher, for his part, was caught off guard by Sarah's return. She was the embodiment of the past he had tried so hard to leave behind, but at the same time, she represented the revenge he initially sought. However, now that Hillary was in his life, Christopher wasn't sure if he wanted to follow the path of revenge. For the first time, he began to question whether what he really wanted was to get back at Sarah, or if there was something deeper he was avoiding facing. Sarah, with her striking and manipulative presence, tried to seduce Christopher back into their old relationship. She used her familiarity with him, reminding him of the moments they shared and trying to convince him that they could start over. However, to Sarah's surprise and Christopher's, he found himself hesitating. While before he would have given in to the temptation of getting back with her, now there was something stopping him: Hillary. The tension between the trio peaked at a charity event where Sarah made a surprise appearance. Impeccably dressed, she exuded confidence and charm, while Hillary, beside Christopher, felt out of place and insecure amidst the luxury and powerful figures around her. Christopher, aware of Hillary's discomfort, tried to keep things under control, but Sarah's presence disturbed him in ways he couldn't explain. In a moment of confrontation, Sarah hinted that the contract between Christopher and Hillary was just a farce, a calculated move to satisfy Christopher's need for revenge. Hearing this, Hillary felt a pang in her heart. Was she just a pawn in a larger game? Despite all the changes she had noticed in him, was Christopher still trapped in his quest for revenge? Doubt and fear began to grow inside her, and she started questioning if her feelings for Christopher were genuine or if she had been manipulated from the start. Christopher, on the other hand, felt pressured. What began as a cold, calculated contract was now filled with unexpected emotions. He knew he couldn't continue with the revenge game, but at the same time, he was unsure how to navigate the confusing emotions he felt for Hillary. He was torn between the past that Sarah represented and the present that Hillary had brought into his life. This growing emotional tension created a rift between Hillary and Christopher, and although neither wanted to admit it, they both knew something big was about to happen. Hillary needed to discover the truth about what Christopher really felt, and he, in turn, needed to decide if he was willing to abandon the past and move forward, this time with an open heart. Sarah's constant presence, Christopher's manipulative ex-girlfriend, only heightened the tension between him and Hillary. The dating contract, which initially seemed simple and pragmatic, had turned into an emotional mess, and Hillary felt she was being pulled into a game she didn't want to play. With every event where Sarah appeared, her insinuations about the contract and the past she shared with Christopher became clearer and more painful for Hillary. Despite her strong and genuine nature, Hillary began to question if she truly belonged in Christopher's life authentically, or if she was merely a tool to provoke jealousy in Sarah. Her feelings for him were real, but she couldn't discern if Christopher's feelings were the same or if he was still obsessed with his past revenge. Each time Sarah entered the scene, it seemed to bring back something dark that haunted him. One of the hardest moments for Hillary occurred during a charity dinner. The room was filled with important and wealthy figures, and Hillary, as always, was by Christopher's side, fulfilling her role in the contract. However, that night, Sarah decided to raise the stakes. She approached Hillary during a break in the event, while Christopher was engaged in a business conversation. "Do you really think he sees you differently?" Sarah asked with a malicious smile. "You're just an arrangement, a distraction. Deep down, he never forgot me, and all this." She gestured around, referring to the glamour and sophisticated atmosphere, "is part of his plan. You are the tool he's using to get to me." Shocked by Sarah's cold words, Hillary tried to keep her composure. "I'm not part of any game, Sarah. I know who I am and why I'm here." Sarah laughed, leaning closer. "Do you really think so? Then why has he never told you the truth about what really happened between us? Why has he never mentioned the reason for our breakup?" The doubt planted by Sarah began to erode Hillary's confidence. She knew Christopher had suffered a betrayal in the past, but he had never shared the details with her. Whenever the topic came up, he completely shut down. Hillary tried to believe it was part of Christopher's healing process, but now, with Sarah throwing those cold words her way, she began to wonder if there was more he was hiding. The tension reached an unbearable point. That same night, when they returned home, Hillary decided to confront Christopher. She knew that if she wanted to stay by his side, she needed the truth, not just about Sarah, but about what was really happening between them. When they arrived at the mansion, Hillary, still shaken by Sarah's words, turned to Christopher before he could retreat to his office as usual. "I need to know the truth, Christopher," she said, her voice firm but filled with emotion, "about Sarah, about what you two had, and why you really chose me for this contract." Christopher, visibly uncomfortable, tried to deflect. "Hillary, it's not that simple." "It's not that simple," she interrupted, her frustration growing. "I'm here, by your side, living a life I never imagined, and all I ask for is honesty. Don't you see how much this is hurting me? I can't continue like this, stuck between you and Sarah, without knowing what's really going on." Christopher was silent for a long moment. He knew Hillary deserved answers, but the scars of his past kept him trapped in a web of anger and resentment he had built for years. However, looking at Hillary, he began to realize he was about to lose something far more valuable than his revenge: the chance for true love. Sighing, he finally began to speak. "Sarah was the first love of my life. When we met, I was still building my empire. She was everything to me. I trusted her, believed we could face the world together. But when things started to go well for me, and money and power increased, something changed. She left me for another man, someone with more status, more influence." He paused, his voice faltering as he recalled the pain. It destroyed me. It wasn't just the betrayal, but the feeling that all my effort, all my success meant nothing. I shut myself off from the world since then. And when Sarah came back recently, all of it resurfaced. The anger, the need to show that I wasn't the weak man she left. Hillary listened in silence, absorbing every word. She finally understood the depth of the pain Christopher carried. "When I chose you for this contract," Christopher continued, "I thought I could use you to provoke Sarah, to show her I had moved on. But," he hesitated, "now I see that was a mistake. You are much more than that, Hillary. I lost myself in my own revenge, and you came into my life in a way I didn't expect. You brought back something I thought I had lost forever." Hillary felt a mix of relief and sadness. She now knew the truth, but she also knew she was in the middle of an emotional battle Christopher needed to face alone. "I'm not Sarah, Christopher," Hillary said softly, "and I will never betray you. But you need to let go of that past, or you'll end up destroying any chance of having something real." Christopher looked into Hillary's eyes, feeling for the first time in a long time the true extent of his mistakes. He knew that if he wanted to continue with Hillary, he would have to let go of the obsession for revenge and learn to trust again. However, the path to that would not be easy, and he would need to confront his own demons before he could offer Hillary the genuine love she deserved. The conversation between Hillary and Christopher marked a turning point in their relationship. Although the contract still existed, the nature of their connection had irrevocably changed. Hillary now knew the truth about Christopher's past, and despite all the painful revelations, she decided to stay by his side, hoping that together they could overcome Sarah's shadow and the ghost of vengeance that still lingered over him. As the days went by, Christopher began to realize the impact Hillary had on his life. She was not just someone hired to fill the void or provoke jealousy in Sarah. She was different from anyone he had ever met. Her genuine presence, her calm and compassionate nature, everything about her made him feel more human, more vulnerable. And it was this vulnerability that, for the first time, didn't scare him, but liberated him. Christopher started seeking more moments of closeness with Hillary. The nights he used to lock himself in his office were now spent by her side, talking about trivial matters or sharing stories from the past. He began to open up in ways he had never imagined, revealing not only his pains but also his hopes, dreams, and deepest fears. Hillary, in turn, felt she was seeing the true Christopher emerge. The powerful and calculating billionaire she met at the beginning was slowly transforming into a more authentic man, someone who, despite his flaws, had a heart capable of love. She noticed small changes in his behavior, the way he smiled at her more sincerely, the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, and even the way he cared about her well-being. These subtle gestures indicated that something deep was growing between them. However, even though true feelings were blossoming, Hillary remained cautious. She knew that the contract between them was still in place, and that, despite the emotional changes, there was a thin line between what was real and what was part of an agreement. She feared that when the contract ended, Christopher might revert to everything they had built, especially if Sarah continued to appear in their lives. This uncertainty intensified when, on a quiet afternoon, Christopher decided to take Hillary on an unexpected trip. He arranged an escape to one of his beachfront properties, far from the city lights, commitments, and most importantly, far from Sarah. The place was stunning, with the sound of waves crashing on the shore and the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was the kind of setting that seemed straight out of a fairy tale, perfect for someone seeking a bit of escapism. Hillary was amazed by the beauty of the place, but at the same time, couldn't help but feel a pang of insecurity. Why had Christopher brought her here? Was it another attempt to appease his conscience, or perhaps a move to rekindle the superficial connection they had established at the beginning of the contract? Or maybe, she hoped, it was a genuine step towards something deeper and more meaningful. During dinner that night, on a porch overlooking the ocean, Christopher seemed more relaxed than Hillary had ever seen him. They talked about everything and nothing, as if the weight of the past had finally begun to lift. At one point in the conversation, Christopher gently took Hillary's hand, something he had never done so spontaneously before. "Hillary," he began with a softer tone than usual, "I know things between us started in a complicated way, and I know I've made choices that hurt you, even without meaning to. But I want you to know that since you came into my life, something has changed. I can't explain what it is, but the emptiness I felt before, it seems to be disappearing." Hillary felt her heart race. This was what she had hoped to hear, but at the same time, there was a latent fear that these words were temporary, a product of the moment, and that when they returned to reality, everything might fall apart. "Christopher, I also feel that something has changed between us," she replied, trying to balance her emotions. "But you need to understand that, as much as I care about you, there's still part of me that fears what will happen when the contract ends. I don't want to be just a temporary phase in your life." Christopher looked deeply into her eyes, and for a moment, the silence spoke more than any words could. He knew that Hillary was right. The contract still loomed over them like a shadow, and he needed to deal with it definitively. Hillary deserved more than uncertainties or empty promises. "Hillary," he said, squeezing her hand more firmly, "the contract doesn't mean anything to me anymore. In the beginning, I thought it was necessary, that I needed an agreement to protect myself from feeling anything real. But now I see how wrong I was. What I feel for you goes beyond any contract. I just don't know how to prove it to you in a way that you'll believe." Hillary felt a wave of emotions crash over her. Christopher's words seemed sincere, but there was a complexity to what he was saying, an internal struggle that had not yet been fully resolved. "I want to believe you, Christopher," she responded softly, "but it's hard. You've spent so much time trapped in your hurt and desire for revenge. How can I be sure that you're really ready to leave all that behind?" Christopher knew that Hillary was right. He had spent so much time building walls around himself that now, even if he was willing to tear them down, he didn't know if he was prepared to deal with what he would find on the other side. "I don't have all the answers," he admitted, looking out at the horizon where the sun was beginning to disappear into the ocean. "But I'm willing to try. For the first time in a long time, I'm willing to try." Hillary remained silent, absorbing the weight of Christopher's words. She knew their journey was far from easy, and there were still many obstacles to overcome. But at that moment, under the starry sky and with the sound of the waves in the background, she felt that maybe it was worth the risk. After all, life was made of moments of vulnerability, and perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of something real. After the trip to the beachfront property, Hillary returned to her routine alongside Christopher with a mix of feelings. She knew that her feelings for him were deepening every day, but there was still the contract hanging over their heads and uncertainty about the future. The weight of it all was beginning to press down on her more than she was willing to admit. What started as a pragmatic exchange was now becoming an emotional tangle, and Hillary knew she would have to make a difficult decision soon. The following days brought moments of connection between them that Hillary had never imagined. Christopher was more open than ever, showing not only his vulnerability, but also his genuine desire to change. He tried in every way to redeem himself for past mistakes and the hurt he had caused Hillary, though she knew that real change would come with time, not just words. Hillary, on the other hand, was torn. She wanted to believe that the man before her was truly transforming, but the marks of the contract were still deep. She didn't want to be a passing whim, something Christopher could discard when the time stipulated in the agreement ended. More importantly, she didn't want to be another piece in the emotional game he had played with Sarah. The emotional tension reached its peak when, one afternoon, Christopher proposed something that caught Hillary by surprise. They were in his office, reviewing some contract documents when he looked at her with an intensity she had never seen before. "Hillary, we need to talk about something important," he said, closing the laptop and turning to face her directly. She looked up, feeling a tension in the air. "What is it, Christopher?" He took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to say something he'd been holding back for a long time. "I want to end the contract." Hillary felt the air leave her lungs for a moment. She blinked, trying to process what she had just heard. "End the contract?" she repeated, uncertain about the meaning of those words. "Yes," he confirmed. "It doesn't make sense to me anymore. This contract was built on a vengeful plan, on a desire to manipulate my feelings and those of others. But now, everything has changed. What I feel for you, Hillary, is real. And continuing with this agreement is just a constant reminder of a past I want to leave behind." Hillary was silent for a moment, trying to absorb what he was saying. Part of her felt relieved to finally see Christopher take an action that reflected his true feelings. However, another part of her feared that it was all too sudden. Ending the contract would not automatically resolve all the emotional issues they faced. "Christopher, I don't know what to say," she began, her voice laden with uncertainty. "Are you really ready to let go of all this? To leave the contract and the past behind?" He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes, I am. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can move forward. And I want to do that with you. No contracts, no games, just us." Hillary felt a mix of joy and fear upon hearing those words. It was everything she wanted. A genuine relationship free from the constraints of the agreement that had artificially bound them together. However, she knew there was more at stake. Christopher's history with Sarah was still a shadow hanging over them. And more than that, there was the fact that Christopher was still in the process of rediscovering himself emotionally. She feared that without the contract, he might get lost again in his old insecurities. "Christopher, I want to believe this can work," she said sincerely. "But you know things won't change overnight. You still have issues with Sarah, with your past. And I'm still trying to understand how I feel about all of this." He stepped closer, holding Hillary's hands with a surprising gentleness. "I know, and I'm willing to face all of it, one step at a time. But I want to do it with you. I don't want to pretend anymore, Hillary. I want us to be honest with each other, to build something real." The warmth of Christopher's touch made Hillary feel connected to him in a way she couldn't explain. She knew he was being sincere and genuinely wanted to move forward. But at the same time, the wounds were still very fresh, and she needed time to process everything. "I need to think about this," she said, gently withdrawing her hands from his. "I need time, Christopher, to understand what I want, what we really want." He nodded, respecting Hillary's decision. "Of course I understand. And I won't pressure you. Just know that I'll be here, waiting for you, whatever your decision is." In the days that followed, Hillary reflected deeply on what she wanted for her future. She loved Christopher, or at least she was beginning to feel something close to that. But she didn't want to build a relationship based on doubts and uncertainties. She knew that before making a definitive decision, she needed to be sure that they were both ready to move forward, without contracts or ghosts from the past. Hillary's decision, however, would not be easy. She found herself at an emotional crossroads. On one hand, the desire to dive headfirst into a relationship that could be transformative. On the other, the fear that without the foundation of the contract, everything would fall apart. She knew she needed to take a step forward, but how could she ensure that this step would lead to true love and not more pain? As these questions swirled in her mind, Hillary began to realize something important. What was at stake wasn't just her relationship with Christopher, but also the way she saw herself. The contract, as superficial as it was, had offered a kind of security. Now, without it, Hillary would have to trust her own judgment and, above all, her own heart. And it was with this new clarity that Hillary knew what she needed to do. Hillary knew the decisive moment had come. After days of reflecting on what Christopher had proposed, she felt ready to face the situation with honesty, both with herself and with him. The contract, which once seemed to offer artificial security, had now become an obstacle. It was a constant reminder of the beginning of their relationship, based on interests and manipulations. But at the same time, Hillary knew that the contract had created an emotional growth journey for both her and Christopher. One afternoon, Hillary decided it was time to meet with Christopher and put an end to the situation once and for all. She asked him to meet her at a quiet cafe, far from the glamour of the mansions and the formality of the luxurious environment that surrounded them. She wanted a place that reflected the simplicity and sincerity they both needed to move forward. Christopher arrived a bit nervous. clearly anxious to hear what Hillary had to say. He had been waiting for her decision for days, and although he tried to appear calm, the weight of uncertainty was visible on his face. When they sat down at the table, the atmosphere between them was one of mutual expectation, as if both knew that something important was about to happen. Hillary began to speak calmly, knowing her words needed to be clear and honest. "Christopher, I've thought a lot about everything you said. About the contract, about us, about how you feel now." He nodded, the tension visible on his face. "And what did you decide?" She took a deep breath. "I agree with you. The contract doesn't make sense anymore. It was useful at one time, but now it's just a reminder of how things started in the wrong way. And for us to have something real, I think we need to start over. Without contracts, without agreements." Christopher seemed relieved, but there was also a vulnerability in his eyes. "Hillary, I want to start over. More than anything, I just don't know if you can forgive me for everything." She looked at him tenderly, realizing how much he had changed since the beginning of everything. The cold, calculating man who initially sought revenge was now there, in front of her, asking for a chance at redemption. Hillary knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she felt that together they could face the challenges that lay ahead. "Forgiving you is not the problem, Christopher," she responded gently. "The issue is whether you can forgive yourself and move forward without letting the past continue to define your choices." Hillary's words hit Christopher deeply. He knew that his quest for revenge against Sarah had been an attempt to compensate for the pain he felt, but in the end, that quest had only pushed him away from what truly mattered. Now, standing before Hillary, he realized how much he had lost trying to control his feelings and manipulate others. "I'll try," he said, his voice low but full of determination. "I want to be the kind of man you deserve, and I want to do it the right way." Hillary smiled, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Then let's start over. No contracts, no agreements, just the two of us, trying to figure out what this really means." Christopher smiled back, feeling a mix of relief and hope. For the first time, he felt truly free to move forward, without the weight of the past or the expectations of the contract. He knew it wouldn't be easy, that there was still much to be resolved in his life, especially concerning Sarah and the hurts of the past, but with Hillary by his side, he felt he could face anything. In the weeks that followed, Hillary and Christopher's relationship began to blossom in a new way. Now, without the formality of the contract or external pressures, they were free to get to know each other genuinely. Their gestures of affection became natural, and their conversations, once filled with tension, were now full of laughter and camaraderie. Despite this, there were still challenges. Sarah, Christopher's ex-girlfriend, was still trying to get back with him, insisting on rekindling something that was already lost. However, Christopher was now clear about his feelings. He knew his future was with Hillary, and instead of giving in to the temptation of feeding the drama with Sarah, he finally had an honest conversation with her, closing that chapter of his life for good. "I've changed, Sarah," he told her during one last meeting. "What we had is over, and there's no room for it in my life anymore. I've found something real, and I'm not going to lose it over old grudges or revenge." Sarah, though reluctant at first, saw the sincerity in his words. In time, she also moved on, accepting that their relationship belonged to the past. Meanwhile, Hillary continued to be the pillar of strength and authenticity she always had been. Although she was now immersed in Christopher's world with its luxurious dinners and extravagant trips, she never lost her roots or values. Her humility remained her greatest strength, and this was what Christopher admired most in her. On a special night, during a walk by the sea, the same place where they had that decisive conversation, Christopher finally did what his heart had been longing to do for some time. Under the starry sky, with the gentle sound of waves in the background, he knelt before Hillary and with a simple yet meaningful ring, asked for her hand in marriage. "Hillary," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "you've changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. And I want to spend the rest of my days with you, learning and growing with you. Will you marry me?" Hillary, her eyes filled with tears of happiness, smiled and answered without hesitation, "Yes, Christopher, I will." In that moment, there were no contracts, no revenge, and no past hurts. There were just two people, vulnerable and in love, ready to face the future together. What started as a cold, calculated agreement had now turned into a journey of true love, and both knew that, although the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, what they had was real. And that was all they needed. What did you think of Christopher's decision? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories. See you in the next video.